My son and his wife said I could stay. Just 1 week in their perfect house while they traveled. They left smiling, a bottle of wine on the counter, a note in neat handwriting. I wanted to believe it was trust. But when I noticed the faint red light in my room, what exactly were they trusting me with? My name is Eleanor Parker, though most people call me Ellie. I turned 67 last spring, and when I look back at the years behind me, they blur together in a rhythm of classrooms, chalk dust, and neatly graded papers. For more than 3 decades, I was a high school teacher in Maine. Literature was my subject, and I built my life around novels, essays, and the quiet hope that words might guide teenagers through the confusion of their youth. After my husband Robert died of cancer, the silence in my house expanded. It was a silence that clung to the walls, the kind that didn't merely fill a space but pressed against you, reminding you of what was missing. I learned to live with it the way some people learn to live with a limp, awkward at first, then gradually part of your gait. The winters in Maine are long, and in the years after Robert passed, they seemed endless. I lived in the home we had bought together, a 2-story colonial with faded blue shutters and a garden he used to tend with pride. Each season the weeds grew higher, and each season I told myself I would try harder. But alone, there's only so much you can do. I kept the front steps clear of snow, I paid the bills, I taught myself to fix minor things. Beyond that, the house carried its emptiness like a badge. My son, Michael, had moved west long ago. He was always ambitious, eager to trade the small-town predictability of Maine for the restless energy of bigger places. I visited him once in college, then later in Seattle, when he and his wife Natalie bought their first house. But our lives had become more like intersecting train tracks. Parallel, close at times, yet never running together for long. I would call, he would answer, we would exchange pleasantries. Birthdays, holidays, the occasional visit. Enough to remind us we were family, but not enough to anchor us. I told myself I was fine. That routine was a kind of comfort. Every morning I woke at 6, made tea, read the paper. I walked to the library twice a week. I joined a book club. I baked bread once a month, whether I wanted to eat it or not. These small rituals stitched the days together. But deep down, beneath the discipline of habit, there was a hunger. Not for adventure, not for romance, but for relevance. To be needed. To have someone look at me and think, I'm glad you're here. It's a quiet kind of longing, the sort that hides under politeness. I never told Michael, never wanted him to think I was lonely. Parents carry their children, not the other way around. That's the story we tell ourselves until the years bend our backs and thin our patience, and we find ourselves craving the sound of another voice at the dinner table. Then came the phone call, Michael's voice, warm and eager, cutting through the static of an ordinary evening. Mom, Natalie and I were talking. You've been alone up there too long. Why don't you come live with us? We have the space. It'll be easier for everyone. I remember gripping the receiver, my knuckles whitening. My first instinct was resistance. Moving across the country at my age, leaving the house where Robert and I built our life, the idea unsettled me. Yet Michael sounded so certain, and Natalie's voice joined in on speakerphone, smooth and persuasive. You'll have your own room, privacy, everything you need, and the kids will love having their grandma close. I wanted to believe them, to believe this was family reaching out, not obligation disguised as generosity. I told them I would think about it. But that night, sitting alone in the living room with the hum of the refrigerator echoing through the walls, I admitted to myself that there was nothing keeping me in Maine anymore. Robert was gone. My friends had either moved away or slowed down, and though my house carried decades of memory, it could no longer hold the weight of my solitude. The following spring, I packed my life into boxes. Books, dishes, framed photographs. I sold the house, left the garden to grow wild, and boarded a plane for Seattle. Natalie greeted me at the airport with that wide, practiced smile of hers, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Michael hugged me tight, and for a moment I thought maybe, just maybe, this was what belonging felt like. As we drove through the suburbs, past manicured lawns and sharp-edged houses, I stared out the window, clutching my handbag like a lifeline. I told myself this was a chance, maybe my last real chance, to be woven back into the fabric of family, to no longer be a visitor in my own son's life. I wanted so badly to believe it, that this move would heal the silence, that their house could become my home, but I had no idea then what waited for me inside those spotless walls. Michael and Natalie's house sat on a quiet street in the northern suburbs of Seattle, a place where every lawn looked like it had been trimmed with the same ruler, where each driveway held a gleaming car that seemed to have rolled straight out of a showroom. The house itself was modern, all clean lines and sharp angles, its glass panes catching the gray Pacific Northwest light like mirrors. Inside, the atmosphere was no less curated. White walls stretched from room to room, polished until they reflected the light from recessed LED strips that hummed faintly in the ceiling. The furniture gleamed, chrome fixtures, leather couches with no creases, a dining table of smooth glass that showed no scratches, no stains. Even the air carried a deliberate signature, a faint trace of eucalyptus drifting from a hidden diffuser, sharp and sterile, the scent of a place staged for an open house rather than lived in. I remember standing in the entryway on that first day, clutching my handbag while Natalie pointed out features with the rehearsed enthusiasm of a real estate agent. All voice activated, she said, sweeping her arm toward the high ceiling. Lights, music, temperature, you just tell it what you want. She smiled quick and efficient, then tapped her phone to demonstrate. The curtains drew themselves open, the overhead lights brightened with a low electrical sigh. Convenient, isn't it? Convenient, yes, but also cold. The house carried none of the clutter of family life, no children's drawings tacked to the fridge, no half-read books stacked on the coffee table, no framed photographs capturing birthdays or vacations. Everything was clean, orderly, untouched, as though the life inside had been erased or perhaps never permitted to begin. Natalie led me to my room on the first floor, her heels clicking against the hardwood like a metronome. The space was simple, a neatly made bed with a gray quilt, a dresser, and a closet that smelled faintly of cedar. It was comfortable enough, yet there was a hollowness to it, as though the room had been designed for a temporary visitor, not a member of the family. Over the first week, I began to notice the small corrections. Natalie would glance at the towels I folded and say gently, "Oh, we do them in thirds here, not halves. It fits the shelves better." When I placed my mug on the counter after rinsing it, she would slide it back into the dishwasher. Even the hand soap became a point of commentary. "That one's just for guests," she'd remark lightly when I reached for a bottle in the powder room. "We keep the everyday one under the sink." None of it was cruel, not directly. Her tone was always even, her smile unfaltering. But the message was clear. There was a right way to live in this house, and it was hers. My presence was acceptable only if I left no trace. Still, I tried. I wanted so badly to feel at home, to believe her assurances that I was part of the family. One afternoon, while unpacking the last of my boxes, I brought out a knitted blanket, Robert's blanket. He had given it to me during one of his hospital stays, his hands trembling as he draped it over my shoulders. The yarn was worn now, faded at the edges, but it carried warmth that no thermostat could mimic. I spread it carefully across the foot of my bed. Later, I placed a photograph on the dresser, our wedding picture, framed in wood that Robert had carved himself. I thought it might soften the sterility of the room, might tether me to something familiar. That evening, Natalie stopped by. She smiled at the blanket, at the photo, and then tilted her head slightly. "Such lovely keepsakes," she said. "But maybe we should put them away just for now? We don't want the room to feel cluttered." She was polite, almost apologetic, but the suggestion was not really a suggestion. I nodded and lifted the blanket, folding it slowly, pressing the photograph back into the box. The dresser top was once again bare, the bed neat, the room returned to its curated stillness. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was only trying to fit in. Yet that night, lying in the immaculate bed, I stared at the ceiling and felt a strange tightness in my chest. This wasn't my home, not really. It was a place where every gesture was measured, every item judged for how well it aligned with someone else's vision of perfection. And as the days passed, the sensation deepened. Whenever I moved through the spotless halls, a thought nagged at me, that the house itself was watching, weighing each action, waiting for me to misstep. I told myself it was only nerves, but some part of me already knew this was not just a house. It was something else entirely. It was a Wednesday morning in late May when Natalie knocked on my door. Her knuckles rapped softly, polite but insistent, as though even her gestures carried an expectation of efficiency. When I opened it, she was already dressed in linen, her hair tied back in a smooth knot, a tablet tucked under one arm, and a ceramic mug in her hand. The steam curled upward, carrying the faint scent of matcha. "We wanted to talk to you," she said with a smile that seemed rehearsed. "Michael and I are taking a short trip next week, just the two of us." Behind her, Michael appeared, carrying a suitcase halfway packed, shirts folded into impossibly neat stacks. He gave me a quick grin, the kind he used when he was 12 and wanted to soften bad news. Hawaii, Natalie added, her voice dipping slightly as if the word itself carried sunshine. It's been years since we've had time, just us. We thought it would be good. For the marriage, for the soul. She laughed lightly, as though framing it as something wholesome might make it easier for me to accept. Before I could respond, she placed the mug on the dresser and handed me a folded sheet of paper. We've written everything down, she said, gesturing to the typed list. The plants that need watering, the trash schedule, the Wi-Fi codes in case you need them. Her tone was cheerful, practical, the tone of someone who had planned every detail. Michael stepped forward then, brushing my arm gently. We trust you, Mom. We'd rather you be here than alone back in Maine. It makes us feel better. The word trust lingered in the room, like a perfume I couldn't quite place. I smiled, or tried to. Of course I said I would stay. I told them it wasn't a problem, that I'd be happy to help. But deep down, I felt something colder. A small flicker of unease, the same feeling you get when a friend hands you a beautifully wrapped gift, and you wonder what's inside, whether it's truly for you or for them. Natalie led me to the kitchen, where on the marble island sat a bottle of Merlot with a cream-colored card propped beside it. The handwriting was precise, perfectly looped, the kind of script people practice in school notebooks but rarely use in real life. For your quiet evenings, thank you for everything. I picked up the bottle, turning it in my hands, feeling the smooth glass beneath my fingers. It should have been a kind gesture. I should have been touched. Instead, a faint unease tightened in my chest. Because her smile remained. That same smile she always wore, polished, symmetrical, and entirely hollow. It stretched across her face even after the words had ended, even after silence should have replaced them. Too long. Just long enough to make me wonder what rested behind it. Michael kissed my cheek, warm and hurried, then returned to the suitcase waiting upstairs. The children, Ethan and Lily, waved sleepily from the doorframe, their backpacks slung over their small shoulders as if even their departure had been rehearsed. And then, just like that, they were gone. The front door closed, the car engine hummed down the manicured street, and the house was mine. I stood in the foyer, the wine bottle still cradled in my hands, the note resting against my palm. I told myself I should feel grateful, even honored. They trusted me with their home, their things, their lives. That was what family meant, wasn't it? But the silence that followed was heavy, unnatural. It clung to me like a coat I couldn't take off. I wandered into the living room, sat down with the bottle resting on the glass coffee table, and stared at the blank white walls. Not a single photograph of Michael as a boy. Not a single picture of the children at school or on vacation. Only abstract art, framed and hung with perfect precision, as though someone had decided that memories were untidy and better left unrecorded. The light from the wide windows cut across the floor in clean, sharp lines. It looked beautiful in a way that felt hostile, like a gallery you weren't supposed to touch. And then, in that curated silence, the unease returned. Stronger this time, because no matter how much I tried to convince myself otherwise, Natalie's smile lingered in my mind, frozen and unyielding, as if it had been painted on. It was meant to reassure me. Instead, it unsettled me. For the first time I wondered, not whether I was trusted, but whether I was being tested. The morning after they left, the house greeted me with silence. Not the gentle kind you welcome after company, but a silence so exact it felt curated, almost staged. I lingered in the foyer for a while, listening for something. Footsteps, laughter, the distant hum of Michael's voice. But there was nothing. Just the faint buzz of electricity in the walls, a low background hum that made the quiet sharper. I decided to busy myself, to make the day feel ordinary. Outside, the garden stretched across a narrow strip of lawn, bordered by rose bushes and lavender that Natalie had hired someone to prune. It was neat, precise, almost artificial in its perfection. Still, I knelt in the soil, pulling weeds that had escaped the landscaper's eye, letting the earth cling to my fingers. I wore Robert's old straw hat, the one frayed at the edges. Out there, under the soft gray sun of Seattle, I could almost forget where I was. I hummed a tune as I worked, a melody I used to sing while preparing lessons, something only half remembered now. For an hour, it was just me, the garden, and the sound of birds skipping across the fence. My knees ached, my back protested, but in the dirt I felt steadier than I had inside those polished walls. By noon, the air had warmed. I wiped my hands on a rag, stepped back inside, and carefully left my shoes by the door. The kitchen greeted me with its marble counters, its stainless steel appliances shining like surgical instruments. I filled the kettle, reached for the chipped mug I had claimed as my own, one of the few cups in the cabinet that looked like it had actually been used. As the water boiled, I looked around. Everything was perfectly aligned. The knives in their wooden block were arranged by size. The fruit in a bowl gleamed as if waxed. Even the blinds were drawn halfway, allowing just enough light to cut across the floor in narrow bands, sharp as blades. I sat by the wide kitchen window with my tea, inhaling the lemon ginger steam. I should have felt at peace. Instead, the stillness pressed against me, too heavy for comfort. It was the kind of quiet that didn't invite rest. It demanded it, as though the house itself expected me to sit still and small and take up as little space as possible. In the afternoon, I wandered through the rooms I usually tiptoed past when Michael and Natalie were home. The dining room looked untouched, its table gleaming beneath a chandelier that threw cold light across the glass surface. The linen napkins were folded with geometric precision. I ran a finger across the back of a chair. No dust. It could have been a magazine spread. Beautiful, but uninhabitable. The living room was no different. The shelves were lined with books whose spines looked deliberately chosen for their colors rather than their words. I pulled one out. Its pages cracked stiffly, unread, like a prop on a stage. On the end table, a diffuser released another burst of eucalyptus, crisp and antiseptic. By evening, I made myself a simple dinner. Soup and bread. I ate in silence, washed the dishes, dried them immediately, then sat with a book in the living room. The silence thickened as the sky outside deepened from gray to indigo. Eventually, I retreated to my bedroom. The bed was neatly made, the quilt smoothed so tightly it barely wrinkled beneath me. I opened a crossword, letting the soft scratch of pencil distract me. For a moment, I thought perhaps I had been too quick to judge, that the house was only what it appeared to be, cold but harmless. And then I saw it. A faint red glow in the upper corner of the ceiling. Small, insistent, pulsing in a steady rhythm like the blink of a watchful eye. At first I told myself it was nothing. Perhaps a smoke detector, perhaps a motion sensor. But the longer I stared, the more certain I became. This was not a house settling into silence. This was something else. The unease I had felt all day crystallized into something sharper, a chill that crawled beneath my skin. I pulled the quilt up to my chin and kept my eyes fixed on that tiny red light. Whatever it was no longer just my imagination. I didn't sleep much that night. The little red glow seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat, steady and unyielding. No matter how many times I told myself it was nothing, just a smoke detector, just a harmless sensor, I couldn't shake the certainty that it was watching. Finally, just after midnight, I pushed the covers back and slid quietly out of bed. The hardwood floor was cool beneath my bare feet, the air too still. I dragged the desk chair beneath the corner of the ceiling, its wooden legs scraping softly against the polished floor, and climbed up. Up close, it was unmistakable. What looked like an ordinary smoke alarm was nothing of the sort. There was no faint plastic haze, no test button, no battery compartment. Instead, I saw it clearly now. A pinhole lens set deep within the casing, the red blink sharp against the dark. I froze, gripping the edge of the chair for balance. My breath came shallow, as though even the act of exhaling too loudly might be recorded. It must be for security, I whispered to myself. That's all. Security. I repeated it once, twice, the way you might recite a prayer you don't quite believe. It was easier to imagine my son worried about break-ins than to consider the alternative, that my own family had installed a camera above my bed. But the rationalizations didn't hold. Why here? Why not the entryway, the garage, the front porch? Why place it in the one space where I undressed, where I prayed quietly before sleeping, where my private thoughts were most unguarded? The truth pressed against me, heavier with each passing second. This wasn't about safety. It was about surveillance. I climbed down slowly, legs trembling, and pushed the chair back against the wall. The room felt different now. Smaller. The air thicker, charged with something I couldn't name. My quilt, once a comfort, now looked like evidence, a stage prop beneath the watchful eye of that lens. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the ceiling. My mind spiraled. How long had it been there? Since I moved in? Since last week? Did Michael know? Or was this Natalie's doing, hidden behind her polite corrections and too perfect smile? A wave of nausea rose in my throat. I pressed my hand against my chest, steadying myself, listening to the tick of the bedside clock. Each second sounded louder than the last, a metronome keeping time with the blinking light above. I tried to think of practical explanations. Maybe they had forgotten to mention it. Maybe the house had come pre-installed with a security system, one they never bothered to disable. Maybe. But each excuse collapsed under the weight of a single undeniable fact. I was the one in this room. I was the one being watched. The idea burrowed deeper as the night dragged on. If there was one camera, why not more? Were there lenses hidden in the corners of the hallway, the living room, the kitchen where I had sipped my tea earlier that morning? Had every gesture of mine already been captured, cataloged, stored? I turned off the lamp, but the red glow remained, cutting through the dark like a warning. I lay down slowly, my eyes never leaving the ceiling. My body stilled, but my mind raced, mapping the house in my head. One camera was unsettling enough, but something in my bones told me the truth was worse. This was not an isolated eye. It was the first of many. By morning, the red glow had burned itself into my mind. I barely touched my breakfast. My hands moved automatically, pouring coffee, buttering toast, but my eyes kept drifting upwards, scanning corners, sockets, shadows. If there was one camera above my bed, there could be more. I told myself I was being paranoid, but paranoia doesn't blink red in the dark. So I began to look. I started in the living room. At first glance, it was immaculate. White shelves, abstract art, books arranged by color, not content. I ran my fingers along the spine, searching for something out of place. That was when I noticed it, a small circular object tucked between two untouched novels. A decorative sticker disguised its surface, but the glint of a lens betrayed it. I pulled the book away and leaned closer. My stomach knotted. Another camera. I forced myself to move on. In the kitchen, the marble countertops gleamed under the sunlight. Everything seemed ordinary until I spotted the sleek silver device mounted above the fridge, designed to look like a timer. It ticked faintly, a rhythm too perfect. When I angled myself beneath it, the faint reflection of glass stared back at me. A third. The hallway was worse. High on the wall, above the thermostat, was a black dot so small it could be mistaken for a smudge. But when I leaned closer, I saw the telltale lens hidden within. It pointed directly down the hallway, the main artery of the house. I pulled a small notebook from the junk drawer in the kitchen, the kind usually reserved for grocery lists, and began writing. Living room, shelf camera. Kitchen, timer camera. Hallway, thermostat camera. Room by room, I made my way through the house. The dining room light fixture, another lens, pointed neatly at the glass table. The laundry room shelf, another, angled toward the washer and dryer. Even the guest bathroom mirror, when I leaned forward, I caught the faintest shadow of a pinhole circle, recording each visit. My hand trembled as I wrote them down, one after another. Each discovery was a blow, a fresh betrayal. At some point, I began speaking out loud. At first, it was accidental, a muttered curse when I spotted another lens above the coat rack. But then, a darker impulse took over. I stood in the living room, staring directly into the device wedged between the books. "Good morning," I said, my voice steady though my chest shook. "I hope you're enjoying the show." The words hung in the air, absurd and terrifying at once. I had never spoken to an empty room that way, not even after Robert died. But now the silence seemed alive, as though someone were listening on the other end. My voice echoed back at me, thin and hollow. I laughed then softly, bitterly. If they wanted a performance, I would give them one. I spread my arms, bowed slightly toward the blinking red dot. "Is this what you wanted? The lonely widow in her natural habitat?" The moment chilled me more than the discovery itself. Because in mocking them, I realized just how real it was, that somewhere, someone was listening, cataloging, judging. A memory surfaced, uninvited. Years ago, when I caught one of my students recording a class without permission. He had hidden a phone under his desk, hoping to capture me losing patience during a difficult lesson. I remembered the sharp sting of humiliation when I realized my authority had been undermined by a child's secret trick. But this was worse. I wasn't a teacher anymore. I wasn't a figure of control or authority. I was the subject, the watched, the studied. By afternoon, my list had grown into 2 pages. I moved through the house like a detective at a crime scene. Every corner, every appliance, a potential spy. My tea went cold on the counter. My heart thudded with each new discovery, This was no longer a home. It was a stage. Every gesture, every breath, every mutter under my breath was captured, logged, analyzed. I sat at the dining table staring up at the chandelier camera, the weight of it pressing into me. I was not a mother here, not a guest, not even family. I was the experiment. For weeks I had passed the door at the end of the upstairs hallway and wondered. It was always closed, sometimes locked, sometimes left ajar just enough to tease. Natalie had called it her office, a place where she did freelance projects, though I had never once seen her working there in person. If I ever lingered near the threshold, she would appear almost instantly, that polite smile tightening as she reminded me it was private. On the third morning of my solitary stay, I found the door unlocked. At first I thought it was an accident, that she had simply forgotten to secure it before leaving. But as my hand rested on the knob, a prickle ran down my spine. I knew it was more than curiosity pulling me forward. It was the accumulation of every blinking red light, every false smile, every unspoken warning. The door creaked open. Inside, the room was nothing like the rest of the house. Where the living room gleamed with curated sterility, this space pulsed with wires, screens, and clutter. The air smelled faintly of hot plastic, of dust baked by machines running too long. Power strips sprawled across the floor, cords tangled like vines. A desk dominated the far wall, cluttered with notebooks, hard drives stacked like bricks, and 2 monitors glowing faintly against the dim light. I stepped carefully across the cables, afraid of tripping an alarm, afraid of breaking something, though everything here already felt dangerous. On the desk, a laptop sat open. No password, no barrier. Almost as if it had been left that way intentionally, daring me to look. I lowered myself into the chair and pressed the touchpad. The screen flickered to life. 2 folders sat on the desktop. One labeled footage, the other labeled logs. My pulse quickened. I hesitated, then double-clicked footage. Rows upon rows of files appeared, neatly labeled by date and location. Kitchen 2024-512, living room 2024-510, guest room 2024-509. My fingers trembled as I opened the most recent. The video sprang to life. Me, sitting in the kitchen that very morning, cradling a chipped mug, sipping tea, staring absently out the window. The image was crisp, every movement captured, every sigh recorded. I clicked another. Me folding laundry in the guest room. Me adjusting the blanket on the bed. Me standing in front of the bathroom mirror, touching the lines on my face as if they belonged to someone else. I covered my mouth, stifling a gasp. I clicked again. This time, my heart nearly stopped. The file opened to reveal not me, but Ethan, my grandson. He was in his bedroom playing with toy cars, the camera fixed high in the corner above his bed. His little hands moved the cars across the carpet, his lips forming the sound of engines as he made them crash together. Completely unaware, completely vulnerable. I closed the video so quickly I nearly broke the mouse. My breath came sharp, uneven. The violation was deeper now. It wasn't just me. It was them. My grandchildren, recorded in their innocence. I leaned back in the chair, trembling. Rage and grief twisted together in my chest, heavier than anything I'd felt in years. A soft sound interrupted my thoughts, the faint ping of an incoming message. I looked to the second monitor. A video call window glowed. Natalie appeared on screen, laughing, holding a glass of wine. Her voice was casual, airy. On the other end was a man I didn't recognize, his background a corporate office lined with framed certificates. She doesn't know, Natalie said, her smile wide. Not yet, but it's fascinating. Honestly, it's like a live behavioral study. Perfect subject, predictable, quiet, routine. The man chuckled. That's exactly what Wellness Data Solutions needs. Consistent samples. Our clients love longitudinal studies. The more footage, the better. Well, she provides plenty, Natalie replied. Talks to herself, hums in the garden, even cries sometimes when she thinks no one's watching. It's sad, but useful. I felt sick. Case study, subject, useful. The words pounded in my ears, each one stripping another layer of dignity from me. I reached for a stack of notebooks on the shelf beside the desk. Each was labeled with neat handwriting, house data, motion triggers, emotional reactions. Inside, detailed notes filled the pages. 6:12 a.m., subject stares out window, humming. Emotional tone, nostalgic. 8:45 p.m. Subject weeps during phone call. Potential stress trigger. My name wasn't on the pages, only subject. On the lower shelf, a black binder caught my eye. I pulled it free and opened it. Inside were contracts, legal documents, and one page that froze me in place. A signed agreement between Natalie and Wellness Data Solutions. Terms: consent for remote monitoring, data to be shared for research and potential commercial media projects. At the bottom, Natalie's signature curved neatly in blue ink. I turned to another section. Photographs. Dozens of them. Stills printed from the footage. Me reading, me sleeping, me brushing my hair, each one labeled by hand. Ellie, early morning. Ellie, reading. Ellie, crying. My throat closed. The walls seemed to press inward. I sank into the chair, staring at the stacks of drives, the blinking lights, the quiet machinery of betrayal. For a long moment I couldn't move. I had come to Seattle to be a mother again, to belong to a family, but what I saw here left no doubt. I wasn't a guest. I wasn't a mother. I was a project. The air in the forbidden room felt heavier the longer I stayed, thick with the low hum of electronics and the quiet betrayal vibrating in every wire. My hands shook as I slid open the desk drawer, searching for something I could carry, something solid enough to prove that what I had seen wasn't just paranoia. On the desk, the laptop screen glowed faintly, the folders still open, my image frozen mid-gesture on the most recent video file. I reached into my handbag and pulled out a small flash drive I had carried for years, one Robert once used to back up photographs. The irony stung. Once it held our family memories, now it would hold the evidence of how that family had unraveled. I slid it into the USB port. A soft chime sounded and a window popped up. Device detected. My fingers hovered, then dragged the folders, footage, logs, clips, onto the drive. The transfer bar crawled slowly across the screen, blue inching into white. I held my breath every second, stretching longer, listening for the creak of the front door, the footsteps of someone coming home early. While the files copied, I turned to the shelf again. Stacks of printed photographs stared back at me, dozens of moments stolen from my life and turned into catalog entries. I picked them up one by one. Me sipping tea, me bending to pick up a sock, me sleeping, mouth slightly open, vulnerable in ways no one should ever witness. Each photo had a handwritten label: Ellie, early morning, Ellie, kitchen, Ellie, crying. I pressed a hand against my chest, breath shallow. These weren't just images, they were trophies. Evidence not of who I was, but of how I had been diminished, collected, studied, dissected. I slipped several into my purse, not all, just enough. Enough to speak for themselves when the time came. Then I saw them. Photographs of Ethan and Lily, my grandchildren. Ethan sprawled across his bed with a comic book. Lily curled on the floor, coloring with crayons. Both of them under the same unblinking gaze that had been fixed on me. That was the moment something broke inside me. Not loudly, not dramatically, more like a pane of glass cracking, invisible until the fracture runs its length. I pressed the photos against my chest, the air tearing out of my lungs in a soundless sob. They hadn't just taken my privacy. They had taken the children's innocence. The computer dinged softly. The transfer complete. I ejected the flash drive, tucking it deep into my purse beneath the folded photographs. My eyes burned, but no tears came. Grief was still there, heavy and raw, but it had been reshaped into something colder, a steel thread tightening in my spine. I moved with purpose now. I snapped photos of the contracts in the binder, pages that spoke of consent, of research, of commercial media projects. Natalie's signature glared up at me in blue ink, as clean and merciless as her smile. I captured them all with the trembling steadiness of someone who knew she would need proof, undeniable proof, to survive what was coming. When I finally stepped back from the desk, the office looked unchanged. The monitor still blinked, the wires still hummed, the photos still lined the shelves. It would be easy for them to think nothing had been disturbed. And that was good. Let them wonder later what I knew, what I had taken. I closed the drawer softly, adjusted the chair, and smoothed the surface of the desk with my palm until it looked as sterile as before. My movements felt automatic, like rituals I'd practiced all my life, closing drawers quietly so as not to wake a sleeping child, turning off lights in an empty classroom, folding silence into my actions. But this silence was different. It wasn't for peace. It was for protection. As I stood in the middle of that room, purse heavy on my shoulder, the truth settled deep into me. I had raised a son. I had devoted decades to teaching other people's children. I had given myself to family, to work, to community, and here I was, reduced to a case study, a project, a specimen in a controlled experiment. The rage was quiet but absolute. I walked out of the office, closing the door with a deliberate softness. My hand lingered on the knob for a moment before I pulled away. In that instant, I understood. The woman who had moved across the country hoping for family, for belonging, that woman no longer existed. The one who stood there now carried proof, evidence, resolve. I would not stay silent, not anymore. They came home at sunset. I heard the crunch of tires on the driveway before I saw them. From the kitchen window, I watched the car roll to a stop, their silhouettes outlined by the last streaks of violet in the sky. Michael carried a suitcase, sunburnt and weary, while Natalie trailed behind him, laughter on her lips, too sharp, too rehearsed, as if she wanted the neighbors to believe nothing in their world was less than perfect. On the marble island behind me, the photographs lay neatly in a row. 3 chosen prints, me asleep, me crying, me brushing my hair. Beside them, a handwritten note in my slanted script. If this is security, why does it look like surveillance? The front door clicked open. Silence followed. Not the soft pause of a reunion, but the heavy metallic silence of discovery. I didn't wait for them to call my name. Instead, I stepped outside into the garden, settling into one of the wrought iron chairs beneath the fading light. A cup of tea cooled in my hands, though I barely tasted it. I wanted them to find me here, not cowering in the guest room, but waiting in the open. Minutes later, Michael emerged, his face pale. He stood awkwardly on the patio, suitcase abandoned near the stairs. "Mom," he began, his voice tight. "We need to talk." Natalie followed, her smile gone now, replaced with a mask of calm calculation. She didn't sit. She stood behind Michael, arms crossed, chin tilted just slightly upward as though even now she held the authority. Michael lowered himself into the chair across from mine. For a moment, none of us spoke. The evening hummed with crickets, the faint splash of the fountain in the corner. Finally, he cleared his throat. "The cameras," he said. "They're for security, that's all." "We never meant—" I cut him off, softly but firmly. "Security? Above my bed? In your children's rooms?" He flinched. His eyes dropped to his hands folded in his lap. Natalie's voice slid into the silence. Smooth, practiced. "Ellie, you've misunderstood. These systems are standard. Everyone has smart devices now. You're reading too much into it." I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. "Am I? Then why do I have photographs of myself labeled and filed? Why did I find contracts with your signature, Natalie, selling data to a company that studies the elderly?" Her mouth twitched. Just for a second, the mask cracked. Then she laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the twilight. "You really went snooping, didn't you? Digging where you don't belong? Honestly, you've always been a little paranoid." Michael shifted uncomfortably. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The laugh curdled on Natalie's lips as I spoke again, louder this time. "Is this what family looks like to you? Is this how you honor the woman who raised your husband? Tell me, Natalie, am I your mother-in-law or am I your project?" Her smile vanished. Her tone sharpened, laced with disdain. "You should be grateful. We gave you a place here. We included you. Do you know how many women your age are abandoned, forgotten? You had comfort, stability, and this is how you repay us?" I turned my eyes to Michael. "And you. Do you remember when you were 10, Michael? That summer at the lake when the boys cornered you by the dock? Who stood between you and their fists? Who told you that no one had the right to humiliate you?" His head jerked slightly. I saw the memory flicker across his face, the guilt-carving lines deeper into his sunburned skin. "And now," I continued, my voice breaking, "you sit there and let your wife humiliate me in my own room. You let her turn me into an experiment." Michael's lips parted, then closed. His silence was louder than any defense. Natalie scoffed. "Oh, please. You're dramatizing. It's data, Ellie, observations, nothing harmful. If anything, it's valuable. You've been given purpose without even knowing it." Her words struck like a slap. I steadied myself, my hand tightening around the teacup. "Purpose?" I whispered. Then I looked directly at her, unflinching. My purpose was to raise my son, to teach, to nurture, not to be studied like a lab rat in the home where I was promised dignity. For the first time, her composure faltered. The edges of her certainty frayed. Michael's hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. He glanced at me, then at the kitchen window where the photographs still waited on the counter. His chest rose and fell with uneven breaths. The garden was silent except for the faint rush of leaves in the wind. And then, very softly, I added, "An experiment doesn't sit in this chair tonight. A mother does, and I will not be erased." Michael's eyes glistened. He looked down, ashamed. Natalie's jaw tightened. Her eyes darted between us, sharp, calculating. She had shifted from sweet persuasion to mocking laughter, and now to anger, but none of it felt solid anymore. Her grip on the narrative was slipping. I set the teacup on the table with deliberate calm. The sound rang out in the stillness like a gavel. For the first time since I moved into their house, I felt steady, rooted, unafraid. I wasn't begging for space. I wasn't asking to be seen. I was declaring myself, and they both knew it. The silence in the garden had turned brittle, like thin glass ready to crack. Michael sat rigid in his chair, eyes downcast, while Natalie loomed just behind him, arms crossed like a shield. I reached into my purse, fingers brushing the smooth shape of the USB drive, heavy with the weight of hours, days, months of stolen moments. I didn't pull it out. No, not yet. But I let my voice carry the knowledge of it. "I need you both to understand," I said evenly, carefully. "I've already sent the footage, the logs, the contracts, all of it. It's in the hands of a lawyer now, David Kim. You may remember him, Michael. He was in your debate club once, back when you still believed in fairness." Michael's head snapped up. His eyes searched mine, stunned. Natalie's lips parted in a hiss, the smile gone entirely now. "You... what?" she spat, stepping forward. "You had no right. You had no right to go through my things." "Your things?" I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Do you mean my face on your walls? My voice in your logs? My private moments recorded without consent? Those are not your things, Natalie. They are mine. And you sold them." Her cheeks flushed red. "You don't understand the work. This was for research, important research. The contracts were clear." "The contracts were a lie," I cut in. "You signed away data that was never yours to give. You turned me into a case study. And not just me." I pulled the photos from my bag now, laying them slowly on the table between us. Not the ones of myself. I'd shown those already. These were different. One of Ethan, sprawled across his bed with a comic book. Another of Lily, sitting cross-legged on the floor coloring. Both children caught in the unblinking gaze of the hidden cameras. Michael's breath caught in his throat. He stared at the photos as though they were blades pressed against his skin. His face drained of color. You filmed them?" His voice cracked, jagged. He looked up at Natalie with horror. "Our kids? Natalie, tell me that's not what I'm seeing." For the first time, Natalie faltered. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Her composure cracked like thin ice, fragments slipping through. Michael's voice rose, louder now, shaking. "How could you? You told me it was just for security. You told me it wasn't personal." He pressed his hands to his temples, as if trying to keep his head from splitting apart. "My children. You let strangers watch my children." Natalie snapped then, her voice sharp and venomous. "Don't act so innocent, Michael. You knew there were cameras. You saw the system. You signed off on it when we remodeled. Don't put this all on me." He turned to me, eyes wide, broken. "Mom, I didn't know about this, about them. I swear to you, I didn't know they were recording the kids." I looked at him for a long moment. My son, the boy I had once shielded from bullies, the boy I'd told to stand tall, to never let anyone strip his dignity. And here he sat, hunched and hollow, a man undone by the choices he hadn't had the courage to resist. My chest ached, not just with anger, but with grief. "I believed you, Michael," I said softly. "When you told me this house was my home, when you promised I would have privacy, I wanted to trust you. But trust doesn't survive a lens in the ceiling. Trust doesn't survive children being treated like test subjects." His face crumpled. He buried it in his hands, shaking. Natalie, meanwhile, stood rigid, her fury vibrating through the air. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You're all overreacting. It's harmless. No one's been hurt. The company values this kind of insight. It helps people understand aging, family dynamics, child development." "Stop," I said firmly, my voice cutting through hers. "Don't you dare dress this up as science. You watched me when I cried. You filed notes on my loneliness. You made money off my silence. That's not research. That's exploitation. The garden fell quiet again. The last streak of light vanished from the horizon, leaving us in the half-shadow of the porch lamp. Michael finally lifted his head. His eyes, red-rimmed, turned toward me. "What happens now?" he whispered. I held his gaze, unflinching. "What happens now is accountability. I want back what I gave you, my investment in this house, my share in what was supposed to be a family home. And I want every recording destroyed. Permanently. If you don't agree, David Kim will make sure the courts decide for you." Natalie slammed her hand on the table, the sharp sound jolting in the air. "You think you can blackmail us? You think anyone will believe your word over ours?" "I don't need belief," I said coldly. "I have evidence." Her mouth snapped shut. Michael sagged in his chair, shoulders collapsing under the weight of it all. His silence spoke louder than anything, and in that silence I realized something had broken that could never be repaired. We were no longer family. We were adversaries, tied not by trust but by betrayal. The house once meant to hold us together had become the very thing that tore us apart. 2 days after the confrontation in the garden, a letter arrived. It was delivered not by me, not by Michael, but by courier. Official, sealed, and stamped with the firm name embossed on the top corner. David Kim, attorney at law. I had spoken to David briefly on the phone the night before, my voice calm, almost unnaturally so, as I explained the situation. He didn't interrupt, didn't dramatize, simply asked me to forward the files I had taken. Within hours, he had everything. And within a day, he had drafted a letter so clear, so precise, that it carried the weight of a verdict before a judge ever saw it. The letter demanded the immediate return of my financial investment in the house, money I had contributed years ago when Michael and Natalie insisted they needed a little help with the down payment. Back then, Natalie had called it a gift for our future, but David's wording reframed it properly. An investment, repayable with appreciation for property value accrued. The letter also required that all surveillance equipment be dismantled and permanently removed. No excuses, no delays, no pretense of security. It did not ask for an apology. That omission was deliberate. I had told David, "Igal, I don't want their remorse. I don't need their words. I only want what is mine and my freedom." And so, the letter gave me exactly that. When Michael read it, standing in the kitchen with the sun slanting cold through the windows, he looked hollowed out. His eyes skimmed the lines, his lips moving without sound. He set the paper down with hands that trembled. For the first time, he didn't try to argue, didn't try to explain. Natalie, on the other hand, was furious. Her voice rose sharp, echoing through the pristine hallways. "This is absurd. She can't prove anything. This is extortion." Michael didn't answer her. His silence was louder than her outrage. That evening, I walked through the house with a small suitcase and began to pack. There wasn't much. Some clothes, my books, a framed photograph of Robert that I refused to leave behind. The rest could stay. They had stripped me of so much already. I no longer cared for objects that belonged to their world. The rooms felt different now. The red lights were gone. Michael had disconnected them after reading the letter, pulling wires from walls with a quiet efficiency, as if trying to erase the evidence with his own hands. But the absence of the blinking didn't make the house feel freer. If anything, it made the silence heavier. A silence thick with things unsaid, with the wreckage of a family that had finally collapsed in on itself. I stood in the guest room one last time, smoothing the quilt with my palm. This had never been my sanctuary. It had been a cell painted in neutral tones, disguised as comfort. A guest room, though I was no guest. A family home, though I was no family. As I zipped the suitcase shut, I realized I felt no anger. That had burned away already, consumed in the fire of betrayal. What remained was clarity. I didn't need Natalie's confession. I didn't need Michael's apology. Words couldn't stitch back what had been torn. All I needed was my name back, my dignity, and the space to breathe without an unseen lens cataloging my every movement. When I carried the suitcase down the hallway, the polished floor reflected my steps like a mirror. The house seemed to watch me even now, though its eyes had been plucked from the walls. I didn't flinch. I didn't hurry. I paused once at the threshold of the kitchen, glancing back at the table where my note had sat the night they returned, the photographs spread like evidence in a courtroom. The memory of Natalie's laughter, Michael's shame, the collapse of pretense, it all lingered there, like ghosts. Then I turned and walked toward the door. I had entered this place months ago hoping to be needed, hoping to be loved. I left it now, understanding something sharper. I would rather be alone in truth than together in a lie. The latch clicked softly as the door closed behind me. In the garden, the roses swayed gently in the evening breeze. Their petals, red and fragile, glowed faintly in the fading light. For the first time, I didn't think about whether they had been trimmed correctly, whether Natalie would approve of the way they leaned toward the sun. I thought only of leaving. I tightened my grip on the suitcase handle, inhaled the cool Seattle air, and stepped forward. Justice for me was not a gavel or a verdict. It was the simple act of walking away, untethered, unobserved, free. The cabin was nothing like the house I had just left, and that was precisely what made it perfect. It sat on the edge of a quiet lake outside Seattle, where the trees grew tall and untrimmed, their branches bending over the water like watchful guardians. The first time I stepped onto the gravel path, suitcase rolling awkwardly behind me, the air smelled different, cooler, fresher, tinged with cedar and damp earth. The cabin itself was modest, built of weathered timber that carried the marks of seasons past. Its roof sloped gently, its porch sagged just slightly, but the wood glowed warm in the afternoon light. Vines crept along the edges of the stone foundation, and wildflowers, yellow, purple, white, spread carelessly across the yard as if nature had decided that beauty belonged without order. When I opened the front door, the scent of pine greeted me. Sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, throwing soft, uneven patterns across the floorboards. The kitchen was small, with counters worn smooth from years of use. A round wooden table stood near the window, ready for cups of tea, for notebooks, for quiet mornings without interruption. The living room had a stone fireplace, its mantel lined with simple objects, a brass clock, a chipped vase, a stack of old magazines. Nothing matched, nothing shone, and yet, in the unpolished irregularity, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: ease. That first evening I brewed tea on the stovetop kettle, its whistle sharp but not invasive, almost cheerful. I carried the cup to the porch and sat on a rocking chair, staring out at the lake. The water mirrored the sky, shifting from gold to indigo as the sun disappeared. I exhaled deeply, a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for months. For once, no one watched me. The porch light didn't blink with hidden lenses. The curtains didn't hide microphones. I could sigh, hum, or speak aloud without imagining someone somewhere, taking notes. The next morning I woke early, not from anxiety but from habit. The cabin creaked with the weight of the wind against the walls, a sound that should have been unsettling but instead felt like the house breathing with me. I padded barefoot into the kitchen, filled the kettle, and set it on the stove. While the water heated, I opened a fresh notebook. Not for anyone else's analysis, not for a hidden log in someone's folder, just for me. I wrote a single line across the top of the page. This silence belongs to me. Later, I wandered into the garden patch behind the cabin. It wasn't landscaped, not like Natalie's carefully pruned rows. Here, dandelions and daisies grew beside rosemary bushes, tangling freely. I knelt in the dirt and pressed my fingers into the soil, rich and dark. I thought of Robert's hands in our garden in Maine, his voice telling me that things didn't have to be perfect to grow. Tears stung my eyes, but this time they weren't from humiliation. They were from remembering. Over the days that followed, I began to build new rhythms: morning tea, a walk down the gravel road. A poem read aloud to no one but the birds. I planted lavender near the porch, scattered marigold seeds along the fence. Each evening I wrote in my notebook, not reports, not logs, just small truths. Today, the lake caught the sky in its hands. Today, I laughed at my own clumsy singing. It was on the third day that Frank appeared. He was a tall man, shoulders still broad despite his age, with hair gone white at the temples. He knocked gently on the door frame, a pie tin in his hand. "Name's Frank Doyle," he said, his voice gravelly but kind. "I live down the road. Thought I'd welcome the new neighbor." He handed me the pie, apple, its crust uneven but fragrant. When I stammered a thank you, he chuckled, "Don't mention it. We look out for each other out here. No one's alone unless they want to be." We sat for a while on the porch, eating pie from mismatched plates. He told me he'd been a police officer once, years ago, before retiring to this quiet stretch of land. "I've seen enough of the world's ugliness," he said. "These days, I prefer trees to people." Then his eyes softened and he added, "But for what it's worth, you'll find peace here. And I can promise you this much. Out here, no one's putting cameras in your ceiling." I laughed, startled by the sharp truth of his words, though he couldn't have known the depth of what they meant. It felt like a benediction, a reassurance that I wasn't just running from something, but running toward something better. That night, I lit a candle in the window and watched the flame flicker against the glass. The lake outside shimmered under the moonlight, calm and endless. I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply. For the first time in a long, long while, the air filled my lungs without weight. No shadows pressing on my chest, no unseen gaze following me into sleep. For the first time, I felt like myself. It was a Saturday afternoon when I saw Michael's car turn slowly onto the gravel drive. The crunch of the tires startled me. I had not expected them so soon. For a moment, my heart clenched, bracing for Natalie's shadow to follow, her voice sharp and invasive. But when the doors opened, it was only Michael. Only him and the children. Ethan leapt out first, his backpack swinging wildly behind him, and Lily tumbled after, clutching a stuffed rabbit in one hand. Their laughter spilled into the air before their feet even hit the ground. They ran straight past Michael, up the path, and into my arms. I bent down, their small bodies colliding with mine, their hair warm with the sun, their voices overlapping as they shouted, "Grandma!" Michael trailed behind, slower, his face subdued, lined with something like regret. But in that moment, I let my gaze rest on the children, on their bright eyes and muddy sneakers, and for once, I did not feel the sharp edge of betrayal. I felt only the softness of their joy. "Can we play in your garden?" Ethan asked, already tugging at my hand. I smiled. "Of course. It's yours to run wild in." And run wild they did. Within minutes, the quiet patch of wildflowers behind the cabin became a playground. Ethan darted between lavender bushes, chasing a dragonfly that glimmered like a shard of glass in the sun. Lily plopped herself into the grass and began pulling up dandelions, her laughter bubbling every time the roots gave way with a satisfying snap. Soon both of them were covered in dirt, their knees green, their hands brown, their shoes hopelessly ruined. I watched them from the porch at first, my hands folded around a cup of tea. No voice came from behind me to scold them, no sharp remark about mess or stains or proper manners. The children's laughter rose, freely, unmeasured, unjudged. And in the quiet rhythm of their play, I realized how much weight had fallen from my shoulders. When Lily tripped and fell, a streak of mud across her dress, I didn't rush to clean her. I simply reached down, brushed the dirt from her palms, and kissed her cheek. She giggled and ran back into the grass without a care. Michael had been watching quietly from the edge of the porch. His eyes followed the children, but every so often they drifted to me. There was something in his face, something he couldn't quite say. Gratitude, perhaps, or shame. Maybe both. He started to speak once, then stopped, settling instead for silence. As the afternoon waned, the sun slid low across the lake, painting the water in shades of gold. Ethan collapsed into the grass, arms spread wide, chest heaving with laughter. Lily padded over to me, her stuffed rabbit now as dirty as her dress, and climbed into my lap. She pressed her small face against my shoulder, warm and trusting. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Grandma, are you happy here?" The question caught me off guard, so simple yet so piercing. My throat tightened, and for a long moment I could not answer. I had spent months being watched, studied, diminished, told in subtle ways that my presence was too much, that my life was a debt. Happiness had felt like a foreign country, one I no longer had the passport for. But here, with her small arms around me, the sound of Ethan's laughter echoing through the garden, and the lake shimmering beyond the trees, I felt the answer rise in me. I looked down at Lily. She met my eyes, wide and unblinking, waiting. "Yes," I whispered. My voice trembled, but it was steady enough. "Yes, I am." Her face broke into a smile, and she nestled deeper into my embrace. I closed my eyes and let the moment sink in. The scent of wild flowers, the sound of the wind rustling the leaves, the heartbeat of a child pressed against my chest. Healing, I realized then, was not just for me. It was for them, too. For Ethan, for Lily, for the generations who deserved a family built on love rather than control, for the chance to show them that dignity could be reclaimed, that joy could survive betrayal. When I opened my eyes, Michael was still watching me. He looked away quickly, but not before I saw it. The flicker of something human, something raw. Perhaps it was guilt. Perhaps it was longing. Perhaps, just for a moment, he remembered the boy by the lake whom I once protected, and the mother who had stood for him. But I didn't press. Not tonight. Tonight belonged to the children. To their laughter, their muddy hands, their wild freedom. And to me, at last, breathing as myself. The cabin was quiet that night, except for the soft crackle of a candle burning on the small desk by the window. Its flame wavered with each sigh of the wind that drifted through the trees outside. The air smelled faintly of pine and lake water, carrying a stillness that no longer felt heavy but alive. I sat with a leather-bound notebook open before me, pen in hand. The pages already held fragments of my new life, observations about the birds that nested in the eaves, small poems about the way the lake caught the sunset, a list of wildflowers Lily had gathered during her last visit. Tonight I decided to write something different. The candlelight flickered across the paper as I wrote slowly, deliberately. I am no longer a shadow in someone else's house. I am no longer the quiet presence tolerated but unseen. I am no longer a specimen under watchful eyes. I am myself. The words sat on the page like anchors, grounding me. My hand trembled, not from fear but from the release of it all, from the weight of truth spoken plainly after so long in silence. I lifted my head and gazed through the window. The lake outside shimmered under the moonlight, small ripples scattering silver across its surface. The trees swayed gently in the night breeze, their branches whispering against one another. Somewhere in the distance an owl called. The sound wasn't lonely, it was a declaration, a voice cutting through darkness. I let the pen fall softly onto the desk and leaned back in my chair. My reflection hovered faintly in the glass, layered over the candle's glow and the moonlit water beyond. For once, I didn't see the tired lines of age or the weariness of betrayal. I saw a woman who had walked through surveillance, humiliation, and the collapse of trust, and had come out whole. The house I left behind had been a cage dressed in marble and steel, but here, with only wood and stone, candle and flame, I felt richer than I ever had in its halls. I thought of Robert, of the life we built together in Maine. I thought of Michael, of the boy I had once protected and the man still learning how to stand. I thought of Ethan and Lily, their laughter ringing in the garden, their muddy hands tugging at mine. And I thought of myself, not as someone's mother or wife or subject, but as Ellie Parker, a woman who chose freedom, who chose dignity, who chose to breathe without permission. I blew gently on the candle, its flame bowing before me, shrinking to a faint glow. The cabin darkened, but not with fear, with peace. The kind of peace that comes only when you've claimed it for yourself. As I turned toward bed, I caught one last glimpse of my reflection in the window. My lips curved, almost without my permission. A smile, small, honest, unforced. The candle's last light glimmered in my eyes, mingling with the moonlight from the lake. And for the first time in years, I recognized myself there. Not as the woman who was watched, not as the mother who was diminished, but as the woman who had taken back her own life. I drew in a long breath, deep and steady, and let it go. The night held me. The silence held me. And I knew this was not an ending, but a beginning.